There we go.
Hello.
All good? You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. All right. Is there still lots of snow?
Yeah, we have about 4.5 feet out in front of my house right now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a snowy place. The winters here I think this is an unusual snowy winter because of we're in I guess I can't remember if it's El Nino or La Nina. I always get them confused.
Yeah.
And then the North Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which I've written about, but which I still don't understand, also has something to do with it.
Refresh your memory. Yeah, it looks like we're probably live now. So we're just gonna wait for a second and let people catch up. Have you been getting out snowshoeing at all, Sarah?
A lot of cross-country skiing. The place where I live has a huge trail network of groomed Nordic, and I have a trail right out my front door, so I can access dozens of miles of trails and go skate skiing.
Great. Well, welcome everybody who's joining us. We're just going to wait a few minutes and then we'll start our just like 30 seconds just to give people a minute to sign on, and we'll start our webinar with Sarah Gilman. We're just catching up a bit. Sarah has about a nice 4-foot dump of snow at her place. So
yeah, we're pretty buried. If there's
Victoria, it's not snowy. It's very wet. So
if there's any roaring, I'll apologize in advance. It's been periodic roof avalanches for the last couple of days. It'll be quick if it happens.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, I think we'll get going. So welcome everybody for joining us. My name's Adrienne Mason, and I'm managing editor of Hakai Magazine. And for those of you who have maybe been sent the link and actually don't know that much about Hakai, you can find us at hakaimagazine.com. Easy to find. And we focus on coastal science and society from places around the world. So so coastal stories, but also marine stories. So we kind of expand our idea of coast and go inland a little bit, but generally focused on coastlines. So you can find us at the website, but also through our social media. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And I'll mention it later just in case people miss, but we also have a really great newsletter that comes out on Friday, and it's kind of like getting an issue once a week. So it's a really great way of keeping track of what we're doing. So I'm really thrilled today to have Sarah Gilman. They have a little chat with us. We're going to talk for about 30 minutes, and there'll be time at the end for you to ask. We'll try to answer some of your questions. If you have any, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So Sarah's a very talented writer. She's written for us almost since the beginning of the magazine, which we're coming up to our 6th anniversary. And she's also a contributing editor, which is what the other editors and I are very thankful of that she's able to shepherd through some really fabulous features for us. And Sarah's also talented. She's a triple threat. She's also a very talented artist. And you can see her work in this week's feature on the story that came out on Tuesday about a great radio station in India that works with fishers and coastal people. And Sarah's done the illustration for that. She also did a great illustration for her story Rat Spill, which we might have a chance to talk about, which came out about a year ago. So Sarah lives in Washington, and her work has appeared in High Country News, Audubon, Smithsonian Magazine, The Atlantic, Washington Post, and many other outlets. And I really recommend you take a look at her work on The Last Word on Nothing, which is a great little blog that Sarah and other writers, I just post essays and other sort of musings. It's a really lovely little spot, and it's always nice to dip in and see what writings happened there. So we're going to talk mostly primarily about 2 stories that Sarah has just published for us. The first came out in October, called The Islands That Humans Can't Conquer. And then the other just came out last week, called Keeping Watch Over Seabirds at the World's Edge. So both of these stories were set in an extremely remote part of North America. And really the world, I guess, north of the Aleutians, even north of the Pribilofs, about 300 kilometers from the coast of Alaska, about a third of the way to Russia. So how did someone who's lived most of her life in the Colorado Rockies, living and working there, find your way to this part of the world?
Yeah, that's kind of a circuitous story. I actually have a background in biology, and In 2017, I was living in Portland, Oregon, and a friend of mine told me about an opportunity to go and count seabirds on the Pribilof Islands, which, if this is Alaska here, this is the Aleutian chain southeast. The Pribilofs are about there in the middle of the Bering Sea. And I never even thought about going out there. I was fascinated by Alaska because it has so many of the things about my home state, Colorado, that I love, but bigger, like way bigger and way wilder. And it seemed like such a cool opportunity to go out and volunteer and learn about something from the inside instead of just following other people around while they do stuff, which is a lot of what we do as journalists. We get to observe and ask really nosy questions about lots of things we're interested in, but not necessarily participate. So I ended up going out to St. Paul Island in the Pribilofs for about a month to count seabirds, and then basically having that connection with the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge, which manages some public lands there and also throughout Alaska. They sort of knew about me, and an opportunity came up to go on their research vessel, the Tekla, to go out to St. Matthew, because two people who were supposed to go out from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology bailed. And oh gosh, sorry everyone. I put that on Do Not Disturb, but my computer receives everything. We had an opportunity to, the photographer I know heard about the opportunity, and we hopped on the Tekla to St. Matthew for a 9-day expedition with significant transit time on either side. Takes about, I think we flew to Adak to get there, which is in the far edge of the Aleutians. It's an old military base that's been mostly abandoned. So there's all these like destitute McDonald's and things out there. It's a super interesting spot. And then got on the Tekla, and we're on the Tekla for about 60 hours of continuous travel with a stop in St. Paul before reaching St. Matthew in the fog. So that's how we ended up out there.
So not a very easy spot to.
No.
It's great that you had that opportunity. So another recent story, as I mentioned in the intro, is Ratspill, which we published about a year ago, and I got to work with you on that, which was a lot of fun, which was set in the Pribilofs, so south of St. Matthew, where these two recent stories are set. And is there something in particular about that region of the world that captivates you?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I feel like it's not a place I ever really saw. I mean, I didn't think about it until I had gone there, but anytime you spend time in a spot and begin to learn about it, it just becomes, I feel like, more and more interesting. So just by virtue of having spent time there, I just started getting really interested in, I mean, the number of birds up there. It's some massive portion of North America's breeding seabird population nests up in Alaska in the summertime. There's just literally millions of birds. The refuge supposedly has 40 million seabirds that come up there every summer after spending their lives at sea to meet on the cliffs or down in the rocks if they're crevice nesters and try to make babies. So just how wild it is. It's also known, the Bering Sea in particular is known for being an incredibly variable and changeable place. It has, like, it alternates between sort of total serene calm and violence. I mean, people know it best from probably shows like Deadliest Catch. Bering Sea crab fishermen have one of the most dangerous jobs in the United States. So it just is, it feels a little bit beyond the edge of what most of us get to experience every day. And then also has some really interesting, pretty unique cultures that developed there, like on the Pribilofs, for example. The people who live in St. Paul and St. George, which are primarily Alaska Native villages, are Aleut Uranangan people, and they live there because the Russians, when the Russians had Alaska before it was Alaska, they basically kidnapped people from the Aleutians and planted them on the Pribilofs and said, "Here, make fur for us," and then basically kept that operation running until the United States bought Alaska. And the people there have a super interesting culture that's mixed Russian Orthodox Christianity and Aleut Uranangan, and a lot of them are commercial fishermen. And it's just a really interesting place and neat to get to be a part of it and hear about what they're doing, for example, with defending seabirds from invasive rats. They've had good luck repelling a rodent invasion. Rodents tend to eat seabird eggs and seabirds themselves and can be the death of even a colony of millions of birds. And the people on St. Paul have done a really great job guarding their island from rats.
Yeah, that was a story that Sarah wrote last year called Ratspill, and the idea, that a single rat or a single pregnant rat or two rats can really do a lot of damage on these very remote islands where, with the transit through the Arctic, there's concern that wrecks and things like that could happen more. So it's a great read as well, even though we're not specifically talking about it today. So really great. So the story that came out in October, The Island That Humans Can't Conquer, was our most popular article ever. So in the 6 years we've been publishing. So yeah, it just kind of went off the charts. So why do you think that essay resonated with so many people?
Yeah, I think it had a lot to do with the timing. We're all sort of stuck inside and can't travel because of the pandemic right now. And I think the source of the pandemic is incursions on wild places, bringing novel viruses into the human population. I think there is maybe a sort of sharper awareness right now of the size of the human population and all the ways that sort of, capitalist society has infiltrated into the natural world and what the costs of that are. And so going to a place, going to any place when you're locked inside, especially one so wild, I think is really appealing just for the escape of it. But also, the idea that a landscape, on St. Matthew, because it's so far removed and because it really hasn't been continuously inhabited as far as evidence suggests, it just seems really far beyond people's reach. And so it's an easy place to remember that a landscape is a changeable living thing, and you can almost look at it as something that's autonomous in its resilience and its power, and I think people are hungry for that right now because we're in the midst of so many disasters of our own making.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's sort of along the same lines as this place that so thoroughly rejects human presence. And can you talk about that a little bit? That it was intriguing to you, I think, and really what you wanted to riff off, especially in the piece from the fall.
Yeah, so when I learned about the opportunity to go out on the Tekla, I started reading a lot about St. Matthew, and one of the things I found most interesting about it is that someone actually went through the work of discovering through various mathematical approaches that it is the most remote place in Alaska, which probably makes it the most remote place in the United States. And I was really interested in what that meant to be so far away from people. And it also has this super fascinating history. There's only one prehistoric in the sense that it was built before sort of contact with European explorers and written documentation. There's only one prehistoric dwelling on the island. There's no sign of continuous occupation by any group of people prior to Europeans. And then, periodically people would try to go there and sort of be rejected, I guess is a good way to say it. There were Russian fur traders and Aleuts who accompanied them, who went up there and tried to come back with polar bear furs and just like vanished or starved. It's not clear. And it just has managed to stay out of reach. I mean, even people have shipwrecked out there, and artifacts that have left behind just basically sink into the ground. It just has this really interesting history of sucking things down and not necessarily being the most appealing place to live. And maybe not the place that makes the most sense for people to live. I would imagine that one of the reasons it didn't have continuous indigenous occupation, at least so far as evidence suggests, is that it just didn't make sense for people to live out there, even if they had the skill sets to survive there, because there were places closer to the mainland that had the offers of the same resources.
Yeah. We had a question earlier actually that came in before today, and the writer, it was interesting because there was an assumption, I think, that it would be a lonely or sad place because of this lack of human habitation. Did you at all feel that?
No. And maybe this is a quirk of my personality too, but it just, the island just seemed so alive on its own terms. And it was just really beautiful to think of it kind of persisting out there on its own, with people passing, maybe staying for just a couple of days and leaving, and otherwise being left completely to its own devices. I personally find that really comforting, to think that there are places where animals get to live without being bothered and, breed and eat each other and do their thing, mostly unencumbered by human activities.
Yeah, and like you say, it really you demonstrate really beautifully in the article how, and we say this a lot in the world that we're in right now, is that get humans out of the way, and it's amazing how nature is still going on, and it's taking over, and it's absorbing you right beautifully, even if like rusting cans sort of being almost swallowed up by the island. So it's a really, really lovely piece that way. So the second piece we worked on, you and I worked on this year, that just came out last week. So keeping watch over shorebirds at the world's edge. So it talks about a long-term seabird monitoring project. And in fact, it's thought to be one of the longest and most comprehensive seabird monitoring projects in the world, and perhaps even of any animal, really. It's been going on about 40 years, I think, 40 or 50 years maybe. So can you talk a little bit about why this regular and regimented type of watch, and the working title for this piece was actually The Watch, is important to our understanding of wildlife and ecosystems?
Yeah, so I have a background actually in field biology and had done some field work myself in the Colorado Rockies. And I got really fascinated when I was out in the Pribilofs counting seabirds by the sort of, it's almost collecting scientific data, field data is almost ritualistic in its regularity. You have this routine that you adhere to go and do this thing where you're watching animals and paying very, very close attention. It's almost ritualistic. And I find that really beautiful. And the idea that people have maintaining this sometimes tedious, really uncomfortable, very routine work for so long, is what allows us to observe, at least from a Western science perspective, long-term changes in places like the Bering Sea, and to begin to understand natural variation in those places, and also how human activities such as the burning of fossil fuels might interfere with those places. We wouldn't necessarily be able to say that this crazy thing that happened in the Bering was because of climate change if we didn't pay attention over long periods of time. And obviously, people have lived in around the Bering Sea for thousands and thousands of years, and there's generational knowledge there that can also be useful in those regards. So this is just a different way of being able to measure those impacts. And it has a certain kind of beauty in its longevity, even if it looks kind of boring from the outside. Aside from traveling to these incredible places and getting to watch animals, you're basically like clicking on a tally counter and noting in a data book and doing it every day, and like sometimes really bad weather. And and it's done by whole generations of field techs have passed through this program. And some of them, it's their whole career. They go between different seabird projects, and just based on what season. I can think of one couple in particular who do summer work out in the Aleutians and then go down to Hawaii and do work down there during the winter. So it's just this whole other world of watching.
Yeah. You got a really great phrase, lovely phrase in the story about it, this routine being like a devotional.
Mm-hmm.
Really lovely, this ritual of attention, this really, and then the fact that you have this long set. We've got some questions coming in, but I just wanted to just build off that. The last answer is, you talk about in the story like that seabirds are sentinels of, because of this long-term data set, this helps us. They're sentinels of what's happening in the ocean. Can you just speak about that a little bit, and then we'll start moving to
yeah. I mean, and this happens on land too. Birds in general, I think because they're a little easier to study than other things, tend to be a focal species for biologists to look at things happening in the environment. And seabirds in particular, they tend to congregate in the same place year after year to breed, whereas when they're at sea, they're impossible to find. And so they basically feed off of a wide range of different creatures in the ocean. Different species of birds eat different things, plants, animals, planktons, fish. And so if there's something going on in sort of the difficult to observe environment of the Bering Sea, changes that are going on there will undoubtedly influence the birds. So for example, there was in the northern Pacific, and actually the Pacific in general, there was a huge die-off of common murres, which are sort of penguiny looking seabird. They look kind of like they have a tuxedo. They're a little bit of a chocolate brown black. And they, like hundreds of thousands of them likely died in this event in 2015 to 2016. And scientists released a paper last year that basically suggests that a cascade of effects related to a marine heat wave called the blob had resulted in a mass die-off of these birds from all the way from the Bering Sea down to Mexico. And they were just washing up on beaches.
Yeah. Sorry, I just got this one question here I wanted to. Yeah, so you talk about that really nicely in the article, this what we can learn from the birds. So it's really, really great. So we've got a few questions about craft coming in. And I actually, this builds on one that I had. So I know from working with you as an editor that you're extremely dedicated to your craft. So you have very precise, choose your words very precisely. But also your sentence rhythm, your story pacing, that sort of thing, how you scaffold the story. So one of the questions sort of riffs off that a little bit. The person asks how you develop your vocabulary of metaphors and descriptive language that make your stories so lovely to read.
Oh, that's a good question. I think maybe have a unique advantage in this regard in that my background is in visual art. And so I first came to writing and literary nonfiction in college, like really amazed by the kinds of pictures people can kind of paint in your minds with words. And I think about things really visually, and that helps me think of how to describe them in a way that feels rich to me. And often, even when I'm composing a piece, trying to figure out structurally how to put it together, I'll think of it as a painting and like how to block in shapes and how the movement should flow through the piece. I can kind of, visualize it as a whole because of practicing and thinking that way and being so interested in and just paying attention to, I'm looking out my window there, the way things are put together and how they might connect to one another in ways that convey deeper meanings.
Great. So I think that also helps answer someone else's question about how you plan out a feature story. So you said you look at it as a visual whole.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you want to add to that? Like how
say, like all writers, that's one of the things I struggle with most mightily. And the first thing I do, which is part useful and part procrastination, is basically to look over all of my notes just to remember what I actually have and pull out things that interest me, and then hope that over the course of doing that, a shape will begin to suggest itself to me intuitively. I don't have a hard and fast construct for how to do that. It's definitely one of the most challenging parts of writing long form stuff. It's like, how do I put all this together and what do I out? Yeah.
Between falling in love with the research and just like reading and all this stuff.
Yeah, especially love historical wormholes. I can go down so far, and then I get to use, it for one section out of 5.
Yeah. It takes you 5 weeks to find one date or something, but it really brings a nice, I love that those stories with the historical details are really great.
Yeah, it just brings the context so much more out.
Yeah.
The meaning make clearer.
So if somebody is wondering, can you speak a bit more about your biology background and how that informs the questions you ask and your style of writing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I studied biology in undergraduate as a double major with studio art, and I got to do some field research as an NSF fellow in the Colorado Rockies for my thesis, studying something incredibly esoteric, which was parasite-mediated sexual selection in white-crowned sparrows. So if anybody wants to go in, I have one published first author byline in Ethology on blood parasites and how they affect birdsong. And so I was more interested ultimately in the field work than in the actual analysis and publishing, which I found very onerous and difficult to write because it's so structured. So I only have an undergraduate background in biology, but I think it gives me a little bit more science literacy and confidence mostly to ask a lot of questions about stuff without worrying too much about sounding dumb. Although it's okay to ask even dumb questions because there's not really any that are dumb if you don't understand. So yeah, I think it opens up more stories and it helps me see stories that others might not, like being fascinated by the project of field work. I don't know if anybody who doesn't have a biology degree would be that interested in like what it means for people to stare at birds and click tallywhackers or whatever they're called, these little things, the metal counters. I think tallywhacker actually means something bad. I looked it up once. Oh no, everybody calls them this, but they shouldn't. Tally counters. Yeah, so anything you already know from other life experience, I think helps inform your writing and make you better at seeing story ideas that others wouldn't necessarily key on.
Right, great. Sorry, I just need to avert my eyes here. Oh, interesting. There's two questions about Stellar. So who?
Oh, geez.
Huh?
I don't know if I can answer questions about Stellar.
Well, so somebody wonders if you read up on Stellar, who was the naturalist on Bering, on Bering's ships, I think.
I have not read up on Stellar, but I am familiar with the name being on many, many things. I did read up on the Harriman expedition because they made a couple of passes on St. Matthew, and some very famous nature writers and birders were on that. And I read the full account of the expedition, and man, those people are racist. What's my primary takeaway? There was a lot of pretty racist stuff about Alaska Native people in there, as befits probably dominant views of white people at the time traveling, including by Mr. Burroughs. painful stuff. But anyway, no, not Stellar. I hadn't read up on him in detail.
Sorry, John. We there are some great books about it's George Stellar, and I'm sure you probably know this. And somebody's also wondering, did you have any experience with Stellar sea lions or sea otters in the Western Aleutians or Pribilofs?
I didn't see. I know sea lions are around in the Pribilofs. We weren't in the Aleutians for that long. We would see, I think we saw some sea lions when we were up at St. Matthew swimming in the water. No otters that I remember, but I know that sea lion in particular, people find to be especially delicious compared to some other marine mammals. That is about the extent of my experience with those. Mostly what's in the Pribilofs are millions of northern fur seals, which are their own special pinniped. You get these like gigantic males, and they have harems of tiny females that just surround them, and they sit on the beach. They're called beach masters, and they just make ungodly roaring sounds at each other, and sometimes they fight, and they're pretty amazing to get a chance to see.
Yeah,
make it out
the population of seals. People from the West Coast used to go up as far to hunt up there.
Yeah.
So somebody's wondering, any suggestions for someone who doesn't have a biology or fieldwork background, who wants to write science articles that would benefit from time in the field? How do you suggest getting that experience as an outsider?
Yeah, I mean, you really, to be a science journalist, you really don't have to have a science background. Obviously, it helps, but I think just follow your interests and ask all the questions you can, like come to it with humility, like any topic. I mean, even if you're expert in something, it helps to approach it with humility. And just see about, if you're a freelancer pitching stories that interest you, where there might be field opportunities that researchers are open to take you along, and kind of, because like I have a science background, but I have a Bachelor of Arts in biology. I don't even have a BS, but I think I basically just followed it because I was interested. And that's the great thing about journalism. It lets us be students of things that we are fascinated by forever as a job. Hey, not great, but the dividends intellectually are awesome.
So we just have a couple minutes left. Is there anything that you want to bring up or chat about, or anything that you
I don't know. That's a hard question. I'm a little on the spot because I'm on Zoom, which always makes me a little nervous.
What, one more here. I guess, what do you think? What do you find? What's your favorite thing about writing? What's the best thing? What's the most challenging thing? We'll wind up with
that. Well, there is, I think, with any creative endeavor, when you sort of get past all of the personal existential terror and find your way into actually making the thing, it's such a peaceful and exciting space to be in. It just takes a long time to get there. So I love that part. The famous writer's adage is that we all love having written, but we don't always love writing. So that's definitely true. But there are definitely aspects of writing that I love. Getting to make pictures in someone's brain is something I really adore, and taking information and having an opportunity to draw deeper meanings out of things that might just seem like facts otherwise, without that synthesis and musing, is pretty special.
Yeah. Well, you do a beautiful job of it, Sarah. So I really encourage anyone who hasn't read Sarah's or who hasn't read all of her pieces to take a look at what she's written on our website, but also on for other outlets. And I don't know if you have them listed on your website, Sarah, but you're easy to find, I think, online. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I think we got to most of the questions, as far as I can see. I just wanted to remind you, just in case people didn't hear me right at the beginning, that we're pretty easy to find. HakaiMagazine.com is our website, obviously, and we are on social media: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and I really recommend signing up for our newsletter that comes out every Friday. This is like having a subscription, even though Hakai is totally free. We have no ads as well. So it's just gives you a sense of what we're publishing for the week. So thank you for joining us. Keep an eye on our website for future webinars. We're going to try and do one once a month. That's a new thing for us. So any feedback you have would be appreciated. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us. And thank you, everybody out there, for joining us as well.
Yeah, thank you, Adrienne, and thank you, everybody who came. I really appreciate you sitting to listen.
Great. All right.